Joker Folie A Deux seems to be a complete failure, being destroyed in every conceivable way. Critically, commercially, by fans, by casual audiences, nobody seems to like this movie. Full disclosure, I haven't actually seen it, and I don't intend on seeing it either. Coming from someone who watches practically everything that DC releases, I have a channel all about comic book movies and shows. I have no interest in Joker 2, I couldn't care less about it. There's many reasons for that. It's a musical, which isn't really my thing for the most part. The reviews are bad, everything I heard about the movie sounds bad, and the way the first movie ended didn't really call for a sequel. But a really big reason for why I have no interest is the same reason why I didn't really feel too compelled to watch the first one either. What the hell is the point of the Joker without Batman? There's been this really weird trend with certain comic book movies that I just despise, of taking popular villains, or in some cases just villains of popular heroes, and completely detaching them from the hero they were created for. It's a trend that was started and is still being spearheaded by Sony. Venom, which released in 2018, was wholly removed from Spider-Man in every way, which just does not make sense. For Venom particularly, it makes no sense. Venom is a dark reflection of Spider-Man. He has big white eyes and a big spider on his torso because of Spider-Man. He shoots webs because of Spider-Man. Everything about him screams Spider-Man villain. Sure, certain comics did turn him into an anti-hero, but they earn that. You can't just start Venom off detached from Spider-Man and already as an anti-hero, and yet, by the end of this year, there will be an entire Venom trilogy that only briefly connects to Spider-Man and only through the multiverse. It doesn't help that the Venom movies are generally not too well written, don't offer anything interesting visually, and just don't generally stand out. Sony continued this trend with Morbius, and it's absolutely ridiculous that this movie exists. Not only is this a villain who, of course, turned into an anti-hero, because none of these movies actually stick to them being villains, but also he's not a popular character. Sure, you can detach Morbius from Spider-Man, unlike Venom, but in no way did Morbius ever deserve his own movie. He's not even a popular villain. Morbius could have never been used in a Spider-Man movie ever, and nobody would have noticed. Again, it also doesn't help. The movie itself is awful. Then there is Kraven the Hunter, releasing later this year, which is the one Spider-Man villain who I'd say deserves his own solo movie over all the rest, aside from maybe Dr. Octopus, but only as superior Spider-Man, but definitely not the way they're doing it. He's called the Hunter, he wears a big ass lion head on his torso, he's motivated purely by the hunt, and yet in this movie that's coming out, he's going to be an animal lover, killing people who go after animals. How is this real? How do you make a character the exact opposite of his comic counterpart? And why are these movies so afraid to have evil protagonists? There's nothing really about being a protagonist that says that your main character has to be a good person or even an anti-hero. They could be a villain. Why would this version of Kraven ever go after Spider-Man? I said he deserves a solo movie because there's this excellent comic story where he is essentially the protagonist, Kraven's last hunt. Adapting that, making Spider-Man the hero, the antagonist, and Kraven the villain, the protagonist, could have made for such an interesting movie. Instead, they change everything about the character, strip him of what makes him cool, and kill basically any potential for what we really want to see here. I want to see Spider-Man fight Kraven, and Venom and Carnage, and well, not so much Morbius, but you get the point. These movies just do not use these characters in their intended manner, and it infuriates me. But none of these movies infuriate me quite as much as Black Adam. While the Sony movies feel like corporate sludge, I can at least respect that a little bit more than what Black Adam is. The product of one incredibly uncreative man's insane ego that was for some reason allowed to go unchecked. The Rock claimed he was a huge Black Adam fan, which first of all, no, you aren't. Who the hell's favorite character is Black Adam? But second of all, he clearly knew next to nothing about the character and his roots. He simply found the character that vaguely resembled himself and saw it as an opportunity to put himself in the middle of the DC universe. Black Adam is a Captain Marvel / Shazam villain. I mean, look at them, it's pretty clear. And yet this movie makes no reference to Shazam, has him face off against and team up with a very limited JSA that feels more like a Fantastic Four, and teases a fight with Superman, all while just a few months later, an actual Shazam movie releases, which is forced to use original villains. Well, not so much, they really could have just used Mr. Mind, I have no idea why they didn't, but I feel like they maybe wanted to use Black Adam. This all just speaks to how big of a mess the DCEU was. Frankly, there are elements to Black Adam that I do like, certainly more than Shazam Fury of the Gods, but the sheer unbridled and unchecked ego of The Rock and how that that feeling emanates throughout Black Adam makes me feel so gross, more so than any of the Sony Spider-Man villain movies. Then there's Joker, easily the best of these movies. Joker is competently made, has excellent performances, and I love the music, writing that gave us lines that became iconic, and just generally a lot going for it. It's a good movie. It's just not a good movie about the Joker. If you take this movie, replace Gotham with New York, the Waynes with original characters, and have Arthur call himself the Clown or something, this would not be a DC movie. Joker isn't a criminal mastermind, he's not funny, he's not scary, and Batman is a 10-year-old kid. Joker is the most iconic villain of all time, and part of that is how fundamentally connected he is to Batman. His whole thing is how he's obsessed with Batman. Most everything interesting about him has to do with his relationship with Batman. He just doesn't stand on his own. The first movie took so many liberties in its characters and world building, bears so little resemblance to the comics that it feels like an original story they just smacked iconic names onto in order to make more money. And that's something that really worked, but maybe worked a bit too well. It made too much money to not make a sequel, and now the sequel is losing money. When Joker Folie A Deux was announced, I was skeptical because of how the last movie ended. When the title was announced, I kind of rolled my eyes from the pretentiousness. I mean, Joker Folie A Deux. When it was announced to be a musical, I began to be confused about who exactly it was for, and now that everything about the movie is coming out, I can't say I'm surprised. Apparently, and spoilers for anyone who cares, this movie doesn't really tell its own story, just acts as a prologue to the first. Harley Quinn's name is Lee instead of Harleen. Joker doesn't kill a single person in this movie for the first time in a movie since the 1960s. Joker and Harley don't actually end up together. Joker gets gang raped and dies in prison, setting up someone else who didn't appear in the movie to, I guess, be inspired by him. The one who will face off against Batman in, I guess, 15 years, while Harley Quinn, who again, her name is Lee, will be around 50 years old. I don't think I have to explain why all this is stupid, it just is. But it's not exactly surprising. The first movie didn't care about the source material. This one just took it a bit further by shitting all over it. As a huge fan of Marvel and DC, I'm just sick of these movies that are so clearly corporate sludge, ego-driven messes, or just blatantly ashamed of their roots. These movies that take characters out of their intended roles into something that just doesn't work for them without the history that allows them to do so. There are some examples, not of movies, but of TV shows about villains that did that and did it well. Two from the MCU, Loki and Agatha All Along. For all of the faults of the MCU, it's so far beyond every comic book franchise, it's absurd. They both build off other projects to take villains into other directions away from their original role, a role that was already fulfilled, doing so in a way that respects these roles, respects the comics and these characters' histories, and all while telling interesting stories. Another example is the currently airing The Penguin, which I do think is a bit ashamed of its comic book roots. I mean, his name is Cobb and not Cobblepot because Cobblepot is too comic booky, and that is kind of lame, but it is well written, it does build off a certain history with Batman, and it allows its main character to be an actual villain. And so it has enough different elements going for it that while it is, I guess, a bit ashamed of its roots, it is still definitely a very good show. And what really sucks is that for a lot of these movies, there are alternate versions of them that really could have worked. Having Venom go off on his own after he faced Spider-Man would be really cool. Movies where Kraven or the Joker are the protagonists and Spider-Man and Batman are the antagonists sounds really cool. There's a way to go about giving these characters their own projects in such a way that works. Somehow, not a single one of the comic book villain movies released does this, and I'm so sick of it. Also, none of these have been successful since Joker in 2019, so please, after 2024, let's just be done with this awful genre of comic book movies. I think DC probably is, seeing as Joker 2 not only is flopping, but was kept under the DC Films banner rather than DC Studios. And I think if they do make another comic book villain movie later on, it will probably be either in the Batman universe or in the DCU and have a bit of history to that character. But I think Sony, the studio that greenlit movies about the Hypno Hustler and El Muerto, will never move on. But hey, they started it, maybe they could also end it.